In this section, what we'll need to be able to do in the calculator is come up with a p-value and a test statistic for a hypothesis test for the mean. The place where we will find that is under the Stat button here. And if we slide across to the Tests submenu, we'll find a lot of options for different types of hypothesis tests we can perform. But the one we're going to focus in on here is t-test, probably the second option down for you. Now, some classes might use a combination of z-test and t-test, and if that's the case, you might want to talk to your instructor as to making sure you understand when you would use one or the other. But in my classes, I only use t-test because of reasons that were mentioned in the lecture. So, t-test, I'll show you how to use that, and if you did need to use z-test, the operation is the same, so it doesn't matter. You don't need me to go through both of these. Alright, so t-test. You get a menu something like this, and there's multiple ways that this function can operate. It can operate through input coming from a data set or from a set of statistics. Now, most problems will give you the statistics of a data set already. Like, for instance, the given information would include a mean, standard deviation, and a sample size. And so this is the more common way you will use the program. So I'll show you this, but I'll tell you in a moment how you can use the other. It needs a few different inputs, 4 in particular. One of those inputs is the value of the population mean from the null hypothesis. That's why it's saying the symbol for a population mean, mu, and then sub-0. So it's saying that it wants it from the null hypothesis. So let's just assume we have 25.4, as a hypothetical value to work with here. All right, and then the next thing is the mean of the sample. So x bar is a sample mean. So let's suppose we have a sample mean of 28.7. And Sx is a sample standard deviation. Okay, so let's just assume in this case that's 9.6. And sample size, we'll just say 45. Now, this next input here is the type of test that we're going to use. So traditionally, you would either have a two-tailed test, a left-tailed test, or a right-tailed test. The way that you decide that, however, is by looking at the symbol used in the alternative hypothesis. So if it's a not equal, it would be a two-tailed test. If it's less than, it is a left-tailed test. And if it's a greater than, it's a right-tailed test. Let's just assume a not equal to in this example. All right, the coloring, you may or may not have that option, just depending on what version of the calculator you have. It doesn't really make a whole lot of difference. We're not even going to use that. So just come down to calculate. We could draw it, but it's not really useful to draw. We just really need the calculations. So press enter, and we get what we need here. The value of the test statistic is 2.31, and of course just round to whatever you're requested to do. And the p-value. So the p-value comes after that, and in this case it's 0.0259. Okay? So that's how the function works, and that's where you get the information that you need for your hypothesis test. So let's think about a different problem. So let's suppose the problem didn't give us a mean and a standard deviation and a sample size from a sample, but it actually gave us sample data. So what we can do, we can take that data and we can calculate those statistics from it. Or another option is to simply put the data in a list. So here's some random values. It doesn't really matter what we use. But put the data in a list, and then when you go into the tests submenu and choose t-test, switch the input mode to data. And then all you need to tell it is where the data exists. And the calculator knows that all it needs is a mean, a standard deviation, and a sample size, and it can find all three of those from the data set that you have input. So you just tell it where the data is, and in this case, L1. If you had a frequency distribution, so there happen to be frequencies listed or group data of some sort, you would put that list here, but for the most part it would really just be, you just leave this as 1, and that tells the calculator that each data item appears once in the data set. And then of course still, tell it what type of test you have and then calculate. So it works basically the same way. You just need to provide the data set rather than the statistics in the end. And that's all.